Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Workshop Wednesday on 3 ways to help your Science Olympiad team. I'm Dr. John Loehr, and we'll give it a second for everybody to make it in, and then we'll get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get going. Like I said, I'm Dr. John Loehr. Thank you for coming out tonight and making the time for this webinar. While a couple more people are getting in, I'm going to get into some of the business of tonight. I would like to ask you, though, if you could put kind of your name and where you're from and what your role in Science Olympiad might be in the chat, I would appreciate it. I'd love to get a sense of who's here tonight and who I'm speaking to. All right. Some basic information about tonight is just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. Hopefully you heard or saw the recording message come on. The goal is to get you the link to the recording later this week so you can rewatch it, or if you want to go back over something. In addition, so you know, if you're ever looking for it or you lose the link at some point, you can find it again on Science Olympiad TV, which is our YouTube channel. We always end up posting the videos up there. I'm flying solo on this webinar tonight, so if you could do me a favor, and if you have questions, we're going to go ahead and ask you to throw those into the Q&A feature. I'm going to try and do my best to get through all the questions. There's, I think, about a 45-minute presentation here, so there should be plenty of time to ask questions, though by the same token, I'm more than happy to give you back your evening as well. Should there be any kind of problem, like, hey, you're getting a sound issue or you think there's something going on with your video, please don't hesitate to throw that in the chat. I'm going to try and keep that up in the corner and kind of keep an eye on it as well. All right. On that note, let's go ahead and get going. What I was hoping to do tonight was talk about and give you guys 3 strategies that you can use as coaches to help your season flow smoothly. Right, and I see already I got a couple of new coaches are in the chat, and it's, you know, hopefully it's still early enough that some of the stuff may resonate and work for you. One of the big things I want to talk about is this idea of coaching by event type. We're going to spend kind of a good chunk on that because I think there's a lot to unpack there. Then we're going to talk about matching students to events. And then we're going to talk about keeping students motivated, because as we know, it's kind of a long season, and depending upon how big your team gets, it can be also a challenge to kind of keep track of everything. Throughout the presentation, there's a couple of spots that I have breaks to remind myself to check for questions. So we'll take questions at those breaks, as well as we'll do questions at the end. All right. But before we get started, I got a question for everybody that's here, and that is, going to launch this poll real quick. Love to know what you love about the fall. So we're going to go ahead, and everybody hopefully is seeing a poll that from the 3 ways webinar that asks you, what do you love about the fall? And I got a couple of different kind of fall themed activities. Right. Another couple of seconds if the last couple of people want to throw an answer out there. All right, we're gonna go ahead and end it, and I'm gonna throw up the results real quick. Um, it looked like for the group that changing leaves is kind of the big thing. I myself am a falling temperature guy. I love the fact that we kind of get these real crisp mornings. But it's also cool. We got pumpkin spice out there. The fact that Science Olympiad invitationals are kicking off. I think as of this past weekend, we've already had 5 across the country. So a bunch of people getting started real early on the season. I will say on the changing leaves, folks, I think you are absolutely correct. Though being a pretty much a lifelong Midwesterner, I didn't really get how special the changing colors could be until I got to spend time on the East Coast in the Blue Ridge, and getting to watch the leaves change out there over the next 4-year period. It really kind of re-educated me as to why everybody loves the changing leaves so much. All right. Thank you for sharing a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and get into this idea of coaching by event type. And I want to start with this idea that first and foremost, I think we can all agree, Science Olympiad is complex. When you look at it, we're talking about 7 different content areas, right? Maybe you could even argue we kind of get into 8 or 9, depending upon how you want to dice up some of the topics. But, and then those 7 areas, it's not like you just have to worry about that once, but you got to worry about that content multiple times because there's 23 different events. And the truth of the matter is, like, both for us as coaches and especially our kids, it's rare to find someone that can master all of that, right? I think you can have pockets of excellence and there's definitely interest areas, but you're not going to have somebody that's going to be able to master everything. Then you add in the fact that in a lot of areas, finding individual experts on these topics can be kind of hard. It's not every day you're going to have access to cryptographers or experts in geology, or heck, some of the engineers and designers you need for an event like Mission Possible. They're not always like readily available. So the idea for this is to try and simplify things where we can and make your life easier, especially for new coaches and those of us that end up coaching Science Olympiad teams by ourselves. You're trying to make things simple and give you an approach to do that. So the way to think of it is, and you can see these symbols in the rules manuals, right? I believe they're all in the upper right-hand corner on every page, is despite the fact that we have 23 events covering seven-ish topic areas, we're really only asking the kids to do 4 things. And when you break it down, we ask them to learn some stuff, and then they're going to come in and they're going to answer questions on a test. It's a core knowledge event. Similar to a core knowledge event is a lab event. There's a whole bunch of things you need to learn before you get to a tournament. But the reality is when you get there, what's going to end up happening is you're going to use that knowledge to do something, right? It may be solving a crime. It may be conducting an experiment. It may be testing materials, right? But you learn it and then you apply your knowledge. Then we have the build events where you're given specifications about a device, whether it's a helicopter, an air cannon, an egg transport vehicle, right? A robot that you have to build. And you have from when you start your building until the tournament to kind of figure out what the design is, figure out what it looks like, and get it set to be tested at the tournament. And then the 4th type of event, right, are the hybrid events. And these are events where we take elements of 2 of the 3 I've just talked about. Sometimes it's elements of all 3, right, and bring them together in a single event. Great examples of that this year are optics, wind power, material science, chem lab, depending upon how the event is held, also could be considered a hybrid event too. But I think by taking and looking at how these events are done, right, is the key in making this whole thing work. So the premise is, right, that instead of worrying about the content, worry about how the students have to display what they've learned. Like, how do they demonstrate their knowledge? Because my argument is the skills they need for a core knowledge event are the same, whether that is disease detectives, anatomy and physiology, dynamic planet, or fossils, right? So as a coach, in a lot of ways, simplify your life by coaching the skills and apply the knowledge you have, right, of how to acquire those skills to the Science Olympiad events and help the kids refine their skills that are going to make them successful in the event, right? And in a lot of ways, this also aligns to how kids think about events. If you go around tournaments and you listen to kids talk and you kind of look at the events they pick, right? A lot of kids that do fossils also do entomology. Well, if you're thinking in terms of content, like, okay, you wouldn't necessarily think fossils and entomology go hand in hand, right? There's not a lot of overlap in the content. Maybe there's a little bit in terms of, thinking about insects trapped in amber and a real specific type kind of a fossil and remains. But the reason the kids gravitate to those events and they end up being in those events together is there's a similarity, right? So what are you doing in fossils? I have to learn about the fossils list and what I can about the different fossils and what that means to ancient environments, timelines, processes and how they were formed and all that kind of stuff, where they could be found. Entomology, what are you doing? Well, I'm learning about insects. I'm learning about the insect's relationship to environments. You're learning about their relationship to each other. You're learning about their economic impact. So there's sort of this natural overlap. You'll see it also in terms of like disease detectives and this year microbe mission, right? On the one hand, disease detectives is about the process of the disease, right? In some ways, where microbe mission, when you get down to talking about particular microorganisms, right, you're going to think about, okay, how are they causing and what are their role in diseases? So what I'm arguing is that you as the coach, right, spend your time making sure you master the format, right? Let the kids kind of worry about the content, find other individuals who can help out with the content. And what your practices should look like and the time spent with the kids, right, allows you to focus on key activities by format. So when you're talking about core knowledge events, and when you're getting to some of the strategies in a second, like focus on, taking notes, research. When you get in the labs, okay, we're talking about writing up information, knowing terminology, knowing procedures. When we're talking about building things, right? You're definitely building a helicopter looks very different than a robot or a Mission Possible device, except the process you need to go through to have successful devices at the end, right, is similar, right? So the whole idea is this to get you to spend your time on process and motivation and take some of that content burden off. The other thing you get to do this adds to is knowing your kids, and particularly I saw there were quite a number of you, it seemed like, that were on here early on as middle schoolers, right? This is a great way to tackle things and think about a gradual release model, right? So in here, just so we're all on the same page in terms of terminology, what I mean by that is you can be very controlled and structured and well-defined early in the season as you're getting to know your kids, as your kids are getting to know you, as they're getting to know Science Olympiad and their events. But then as the year goes on, you could start to allow them greater degrees of freedom, greater opportunity to dictate how things are going based on the work they've been doing, both inside of practice and outside of practice, and how successful they've been with different activities. And I think the other beauty of this approach in thinking about it is that even if even going this route, right, it allows you to go ahead and have and use expert coaches, right? You're not limited to just yourself. It's very easy if you come across an expert on material science and you find somebody who's really into concrete, whether it's because they're into construction, they own a concrete company, um, they've been, they're a DIYer and they've been doing a ton of work around their house with concrete, right? You could still bring that person in. They could still work with your material science kids if you're a high schooler. Or for our middle schoolers, you get a great physician or a nurse or a physical therapist who wants to come in and teach about muscles and skeleton and all that kind of stuff. You can easily fit them into this approach. They're not, the two activities and the two ways of thinking about things are not mutually exclusive. All right. So when I want to talk about, I got for each one of these event types, think about the events and kind of ways to think about and like what areas to tackle. So first and foremost, I'd say for core knowledge, we can all agree that learning stuff, the knowledge is the most important thing, right? So then if we agree that the knowledge is the most important thing, let's take a look at where students going to struggle. And I think these are probably the four biggest places that kids struggle, right? Is one, even though section 3 of the rules lays out the content, right? As teachers and educators in the group, you're going to, I think, realize, and parents too, I think you've realized if you've been helping your kids with any kind of schoolwork, there's the content that is explicitly stated, and then there's the content that's implied behind it. So one of the things I think you got to help the kids with is making sure they know both, right? Yes, the test may, they're going to need to know particular explicitly stated content. So odds ratios for disease detectives. Well, there's some math that goes into odds ratios that the kids, if they don't really understand it or haven't been exposed to it yet, they're going to struggle with understanding, and not so much understanding odds ratios, but I think calculating odds ratios reliably. And there's other examples like that. Glaciers, right? Again, there's some basics around glaciers that the kids need to understand, but without understanding some of the basics, it then makes some of the more advanced work a little bit more challenging. Kind of talked about it and I highlighted a little bit with fossils, right? We think fossils is just about, on the surface, it's like, okay, they got to identify the fossils list, which is somewhat true, right? You do have to do some identification, but it's also more about the implied things behind the organism that ended up as a fossil. So what does that tell us about the environment? What does the rock that the fossil was found in mean? What does the other fossils found around it imply, right? So there's, again, helping the kids understand the implied content. Which resources, right? I don't know how many times I've needed to explain to my boys as they're doing research papers and they're doing work and remind them that Wikipedia is not really, isn't always the best, most definitive source, right? It's really easy to use, a quick Google search and you can find stuff, but we all know not everything on the internet, right, is of quality, right? Or can be used for all different kinds of settings. So again, I think this is one of the places where as the coach, you can have a huge impact on core knowledge, is helping the kids understand which resources should they be using, right? What's a textbook for them that is one, accessible, right? It's real easy. You can go on and find a bunch of open educational resources, right? These are OER, and these are just essentially school districts and community colleges and universities that have gotten together and said, hey, we're going to put up materials together for our classes and just make it publicly available. That's awesome. But we all, as adults, right, we realize that not everything, there's going to be content missing from a textbook for a 300 level class, right? That you you're not, if that's where you start, you're going to get lost and confused. So you may want to make sure you have the right the right level of content before you get into everything. Um, think about it with particularly with AP textbooks, right? If any of your children have ever experienced an advanced placement textbook, or um, there's a lot of stuff sometimes in advanced placement textbooks where a lot of the details and a lot of the examples are kind of winnowed down, right? There just aren't as many of them as you might find in a standard textbook, because AP has to get through so much stuff. You can't afford to spend a lot of time on any one time. We also talked about things like how to organize, how to study. All those things can trip kids up. Um, and last but not least, core knowledge. And I think I've talked about this before in a variety of settings, but again, to point out, when you read the rules, core knowledge events, the two most important sections are section 2, which tells you the resources you can use during the event, and section 3, which tells you what you have to learn and study. So some suggestions for you as a coach and what you can do with your kids. I'm a big believer in a team organizational system, right? If you watch, and I'll disclose, I'm a sports junkie, big time basketball guy. I've coached lacrosse. I've played football, coached a little football, watched a ton of football. And when you listen to analysts and people talk about sports, you can hear them talk about the coach's offensive system, the coach's defensive strategy, right? The coach's approach. And I think a lot of that practice can carry over to Science Olympiad, because you as the coach, I'm hoping, are going to stay around for a few years. The kids are going to change, right? You really want to come up with a system that works for you, that makes sense for you, that you can give to your kids and have them use. Same thing if you're a classroom teacher. We all have our classroom management systems, right? And we use them pretty much year to year. And you just expect the students to come in and kind of adapt to your system. This is a great place to do it. This way, you should apply it to all events, right? Because the other nice thing is you're learning one system, as opposed to trying to learn potentially 15 to 30 different systems, depending upon how your students approach things. Here, I always put a plug: online is best, right? Putting stuff up in the cloud because it makes it accessible to you when you're traveling. But also it's way easier to organize stuff. Talk about the basics, right? So everything from a team note-taking strategy to being able to identify the things that are important versus the things that are interesting. I don't think there's a person alive these days that hasn't fallen into a Google rabbit hole where you've done a search and the next thing you know, you're probably 7, 8 articles in on a topic when all you were really looking for was one simple answer. And then we had talked about this idea of like quality versus suspect sources. Then from there, once you have your system and they're collecting data, how do you handle your resource page or your binder, right? What goes in, what should be on the page, and kind of help the kids work through that. I'm a big believer, particularly when you only have pages, right? Put down the stuff that either A, isn't worth the time remembering, so constants, formulas, conversions, those kind of things, or the kind of things that you screw up when you're under pressure. I did an entire workshop this summer, and I probably blew talking affect versus effect, right? I was constantly flipping them, and there were a couple other ones I was flipping, because I was in a workshop like I am now, recording something live. And that's just one of those things that, for whatever reason, that day I was just flipping it because of the pressure. And again, so think about your resource page with your students, of making sure they have the information there. It's in a lot of ways, it's almost like a security blanket, right? For those of us old enough, Linus Van Pelt, and his blanket, right? It's a tool he has with him because it makes him feel comfortable and secure in a variety of environments. I would treat in a lot of ways, the resource page the same way. And then the big thing here is quiz, right? Drill the kids, make them practice, make them show you knowledge. And we'll get into a little bit more of the reasons why on that one a little bit later when we talk to matching kids and motivating them. Lab events. I kind of already talked about mixed knowledge and hands-on. Again, looking at what trips the students up, right? The knowledge, making sure they understand the fundamental concepts that are out there. Making sure that they understand what pH means, or trying to think of another great one, and I'm blanking at the moment. But I think you get the idea, right? Like what's the underlying content of the experiment, right? What do the tests mean? What are we looking for? Then we get into the technical. How do you do the test, right? What parts work? Like then the results. What does it mean, right? Like so, how to interpret data, how to look for trends. What should they be looking for when they're doing different tasks? And then last but not least, in a very formal setting, how do you report it? How do I talk about it? How do I write it up? So this is, you get into making graphs, making tables. When should I use a line graph versus a bar graph versus a pie chart? Those kind of things. And again, with lab events, because they're so similar to core knowledge, sections 2 and 3 of the rules are really important. What are you doing? What's the content? Section 3, right? Section 2, what resources do I have? What are the pieces that I get to bring, or the things I'll have with me to help me complete this task? When it comes to this lab event, this is a place where I think you want to really think hard about the two participants, right? So do you, how are they dividing the workload? Are there particular tasks or particular things one student is learning versus another student? Big things to talk about, right? The basics. So vocab, how equipment works. Oh, accuracy versus precision. That's another concept I always flip when I really have to explain them, right? The basics of statistics, simple coding, right? Like, how do you figure that? Those are the kind of things that you can help a student do and make sure the students in those events are comfortable with. And then the big thing when it comes to setting up the practices, practice like you play. I think lab events naturally lend themselves to breaking them into pieces, right? So we'll take Crime Busters here, for example. There are a bunch of different types of evidence that you have to analyze for Crime Busters. I would start my kids working through each kind of chunk of evidence, right? So we're going to work through our powders first, right? And then we're going to work through a couple of different tests around powders, flame tests, solubility, those kind of things. Then we're going to move into fingerprints. Then we're going to move into fibers, right? And, we can, but at some point, they have to have an experience where all those pieces come together. If nothing else, for the time management aspect of it, right? If all I ever am doing when I practice is one task out of 10 that I have to complete at a tournament, I'm going to get a really distorted view of my time, my approach, and how things are going. All right, we get to build events. Biggest thing I can tell you about a build event: do whatever you can to make sure you bring a device, right? The rules are set up so that if you're not bringing a device, right, you're going to get penalized. And it's going to hurt your overall score. If you have a device and you at least make an attempt to do something with the device, right, it's going to help you when it comes time to the scoring for the event. Again, let's look at what trips the kids up. Hey, how do they start? Like, okay, I think we've all suffered from and had that experience of, I got a blank sheet of paper in front of me, now what, right? I want you to draw me something. I want you to design something. All right, well, where do I start? Break that down, help the kids with that process. They're going to need help picking their design. You're going to have a bunch of different kids that are going to be wanting to be involved in this part, right? How do I go about figuring out which design do I want? How do we go about them working with designs? And I'm going to put a plug in for it at the end, but I'll put a plug in for it now. Next Tuesday on our Tech Tuesday, we're going to have a workshop from Onshape, right? It's one of our partners here at Science Olympiad. They're a free online CAD program talking about how you can use CAD as a design tool to help you with these build events. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, and there'll be information on where you can find it at the end, but definitely try and get your kids or you yourself come to that webinar Tuesday. Again, 5 to 6 Central. You got to answer the big question here with build events. How good is good enough, right? We can keep trying to work for this idea of perfection, right? And our Mission Possible device. Okay, we have 3 places where it sometimes will stick. Okay, well, how often does it stick? Well, maybe 3 out of every 10 runs, it's sticking at one of these spots. Is that good enough, or do we really have to make sure that all transfers run perfectly every single time? And this is also a place to think about schedules. For build events, sections 3, 4, and 5. 3 tells you about the rules about what you're building, right? 4 tells you about testing, I believe, though now that we've changed the rules a little bit this year, I may be off. That may be the design logs, which you can ignore for most of the events. And 5 gets you into the competition or the conditions under which the device will be tested. So in a build event, the 2 big places to pay attention to obviously are A, what you have to build and what you can use, and B, under what conditions it's going to be tested. How much time, what can you do between tests, all those things. All right. In terms of build event strategies, set deadlines, stick to them. Right. I used this one before. I think like NASA. If you've been paying at all attention to NASA's major return to manned space flight, and particularly their planned Artemis missions to put men back on the or humans, I should say, back on the moon. They've been doing it in stages, and they have particular tests, right? And if something doesn't pass a test, then they go about and they reevaluate, they make changes, they make tweaks, and they test again. I would encourage you to do that with your build events and help the kids break it down and help the kids design and decide, okay, what are we testing for? It can't always be perfection, and it can't always be every aspect of the vehicle, right? It can't, or whatever you're building. Right? If you're expecting everything to be perfect every single time, it's a bad experiment. There's way too many variables. So identify phases, identify precursors, and work that through. I talked about it, emphasize the design process. James threw out a question here about the name link for the Tuesday build event webinar. It's James, I will have a definite link for it and information for you at the end. You can also find it on the Science Olympiad workshop page off of our main website. So if you go to soinc.org /look for workshops, you can find it there. But it's like, I think I called it 4 ways to use Onshape in the design process. And we're gonna have a couple of educators from Onshape on talking about how to use it and how to use it specifically to make some of these other Science Olympiad events easier for yourself. While I'm in here, Ryan threw a question in, and I said is this being recorded? For those of you that may have joined us late, yes, we are recording it. I'll get you a copy later this week, as soon as the recording's available. And then again, you as the coach need to set the process, right? How are you selecting the design? Are you going to go design versus trial and error? I will tell you, I know a lot of teams out there, and particularly I think Towers is a great one, right? Let's just start building, right? We got some balsa wood. We'll start throwing some stuff together. Helicopters, same way. And you can do it that way, but you're going to go through a lot of builds. You're going to go through a lot of balsa. And I think you're going to have a lot more miss than hit. I would encourage you to design, build your prototypes, and then test your prototypes. All right. Okay, hybrid events. These guys are double duty, right? One of the things I'll tell you about them, there's almost always a core knowledge component, right? So again, you can start thinking about and treating hybrid events somewhat like core knowledge events, and then figure out what the other part is, right? The biggest, I think, other challenge here with these events is how do you prioritize your preparation? How do you prioritize the work within the event? And then how do you divide it, right? Is it, so wind power is a great example this year of a hybrid event, right? The students are going to have to build a fan again, right? Or essentially a fan blade, right? That we can attach and see how well it captures wind energy and converts it to electrical energy. Now, while they're doing that testing, right, the students are also going to be taking a test during that event. Do both students need to be there to run the fan test, or can one of them keep working on the written test while the other one is doing the device testing? Same thing for optics, for the laser shoot. Do both students need to be at the laser shoot box line and stuff and, working to get the laser beam right? Or should one of them stay and keep working on the test? And if so, one of them has to stay and work on the test. How do you figure that out? How do they know, that shouldn't be a game time decision, right? That shouldn't be at the end. So, right. So think about that. For hybrid events, sections 2, 3, and 4, it's what resources can you bring, what you need to learn, and kind of build or do, and that can either be section 3 or section 4. And then also kind of like how do things end up getting tested? All right. Kind of talked about the 2 participants. Right, make sure you practice all parts of the event, test, have a device. Again, if there's a build piece to it, you want to make sure you have your device. Then, think about your priorities. So, again, when you look at the scoring section, how much value is put on the test versus the device, right? That can somewhat influence you in terms of where you want the kids to put their time and effort, or where the kids want to put their time and effort, right? If you're going to get more out of doing better on the test than the device, then you want to make sure you get the test taken care of, right? And just kind of have back to, again, how good is good enough? You want to have a device that kind of works, right? As opposed to if it's even, right? It's almost a 50-50 split between device and test. Then you're clearly going to want to make sure you balance your time better. And if it weighs the device over the test, then definitely invest in the device, right? Make sure that works, right? And then we'll kind of worry about the piece at the end. And I talked about a ton of stuff about dividing and conquering. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to jump, and I think this is my first. Okay, real quick. If you like this idea and you want more of this is a couple years back, we created what we call the secondary coaching program. So this is for middle school and high school students. You can find it in the Science Olympiad store. It's a digital download. The entire process in this couple 100-page book follows this approach, right? So it really coaches you through the details of making coaching by event type work, because there are parts that there's parts of it to make this thing work that we really get into the nitty gritty and explain in the book. It's got more strategies for you to use. It's got particular activities to help address some of those challenges we talked about, whether it's organizational or note-taking or understanding the rules. It also lays out the 26 weeks of practice. So it will take you from the very early start of the season through a couple of tournaments, and up to your final tournament, whether that's a regional or a state tournament. There's also a version out there for elementary schools. If any folks on here ended up being elementary folks, similar kind of idea. Just it's going to be shorter and a little more developmentally appropriate for the kids. All right. So a couple of questions. I got one here in the thing from Barbara about software the kids need to sign into without a signed privacy agreement, which takes time. Does Onshape require students to log in? Honestly, Barbara, I don't know. It is a cloud-based program. The accounts are, their educational accounts are free to students. So that's definitely something that I can check on, and I'll also make sure that Drew talks about next week. I'll make sure he's aware of that question. So you guys know in terms of privacy stuff. And I do understand that you look at it from a school perspective. Maybe you can, but this is also a place where potentially the workaround might be with the kids and their parents, right? And it's a thing the parents provide to them. But is something to consider. We can, but like I said, let me get I don't have that information with me, but I'll make sure we get it, and we'll get it addressed, and we'll make sure we can make it available to everybody. All right, Lori asked a question about, can I give you the link to the slides? Absolutely, I have no problem. We'll make sure you guys get a copy of the slides after everything is said and done. And then Laura asked, what do you think would be the best way to choose kids for an event when lots of kids want the event? Laura, I appreciate you asking that question. And that is, let me see here. What I'm going to talk about next is matching students to the event. So thank you for asking it. If I haven't covered quite what you're looking for, please throw this question back out again, okay? All right. So real quick, and I just realized the time. I can stay a little bit if folks are willing. So because I couple of slides here, but it's a little bit less dense information. One, when we get to this, we got to accept reality, right? You're limited to 15 students at any given tournament, and you can't always enter multiple teams. Though I will say one of the places and one of the things, Lori, that you can, or Laura, that you can do to tackle your problem is really think about invitationals. Most invitationals will allow you to enter multiple teams, and the fee is for entering teams is pretty low. Some invitationals will even waive your fee if you or somebody else associated with your team is willing to help run an event. So that's one way to kind of challenge some stuff. But the reality is the kids are going to have to cover multiple events. Typically, it's going to be 3 to 4, depending upon your team size. So then how do you know, right? This is basically the question every coach has to answer, whether you're doing academics, whether you're doing sports, whether we're talking club or school or whatever, right? Figuring out where the kids fit, right, is so important, right? Because it's really a proxy for the most important question, right? And I think that most important question that we ask ourselves as coaches is, how can my kids find success? And what we're really thinking about is trying to line the kids up for opportunities for success. It was one of the biggest things and one of the biggest challenges. I mentioned I had coached basketball for my sons when they were younger. And my thing was, I always told the parents to understand that, yes, your child's going to get into the game, right? But we're going to make sure they're in the game and do things that are going to provide them opportunities for success. and to have a good experience and come out of the game in a very positive way. Because again, I don't think there's a universal answer to the question, right? I think it depends upon you as the coach. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on the kids. But I do know when it comes to Science Olympiad, right? We have to find an answer that to the question of how do the kids find success? Because if we don't, we're not really achieving Science Olympiad's mission, which is to encourage and excite kids to STEM careers, STEM majors, the entire world of STEM. And I think a lot of that depends upon them having some level of success and some level of, walking away feeling good. So I think the answer depends upon you as the coach, and it's got to match three things: your personality, your objectives, and your team expectations and need. Go back to your personality. One of the worst pieces of advice I ever was given early in my teaching career was the don't smile until second semester. And the thought being like, you want your kids scared of you, you want to keep your kids a little off base, you don't want them, you want them to be a little uncomfortable in your class. If you haven't realized from watching me here this last little bit, or other videos I've done, or other times we've been together, that's not me as a person. I like to think I'm a lot more empathetic than that. I'm a lot more understanding. I can't fake being mean. Because I don't think that's me as a person. It's a horrible piece of advice. So again, when it comes to how do you figure out where the kids are, right? Okay, it's got to match like you. Is it about, and this kind of gets into the next thing on the objectives. Do you have a team that's just starting out? And hey, we're doing this, we're learning, we're fun. Do you have a team that you ended up taking over a team that was it's your state, you guys have been state champions the last 35 years of Science Olympiad, and your parents have already booked their hotel rooms in Lincoln, Nebraska for nationals because the expectation is year 36 of going to the national tournament, or are you somewhere in between, or like, is this just one of many things that are going on in your school, one of the many STEM activities that may be going on in your school? So I think you got to balance that. And that's the team expectations too. It's like what the kids are looking for. Now, things I would encourage you to consider. Okay, Laura, and this I think starts to get to some of your stuff. Tryouts, right? I'm not a big believer in tryouts for making a Science Olympiad team. The fact is, while only 15 kids can compete at any given tournament, right? You can do multiple, like there's no limit on how many kids come to practice. And if you're just starting out and you got a small team, I'd encourage you to have more people. It's a long season and you don't know what's going to happen. All of a sudden, grandma's 90th birthday is on the day of the regional tournament, and you just lost a student who was going to do 4 of your events because clearly they're going to go to grandma's 90th birthday party. So you're going to want to have somebody to fill in for that. What I do think, and where I do think tryouts have value is, are you the person that's going to be there for us at a tournament, right? Are you going to take up 3 events? So that's where you can give them tryout exams. You can give them test builds, see what they end up doing. Again, invitationals are key here. I think you can use performance at invitationals, which is why I'd encourage you, especially now that satellite invitationals don't require travel. And there's pretty much, again, like I said, we've already had about 5 or 6 of them. There's a lot of opportunities, right? They can be a tool you use to figure out who your kids are. the great thing about a tryout, or the great thing about basing on invitationals, or practice tests, that kind of thing, is it shows you who knows the content. One of the things about using old exams is that the challenge is the tests don't always match the current event content. So you can't just grab an anatomy and physiology test from this year or last year and give it to your kids and go, okay, this is my anatomy and physiology person. Organ systems are different, right? In fact, I think, in some ways, the things that we had in past years, some organ systems are a little bit easier to study. It's a little bit easier to remember things. Some of them focus more on the physiology and kind of the medical implications of the organ system versus the structure function. Like this year with skeletons and muscles, so bones and muscles, like there's a lot more kind of identification and function, or than there is in some ways the disease elements. So you got to be careful with that. The other thing is especially when you do like these tryout exams, like I'm just going to bring anyone that wants to do anatomy and physiology this year, be in my room at 3:45, and you're going to take a test from 3:45 to 4:45. More often than not, that's assessing the kids as individuals, right? But not as collaborators. And I think that's the other great thing about invitationals is if you can do a couple of them, you get to see your kids working and collaborating with different students on the team. You can also give them team challenges, right? So this is, and by that I mean task to focus on the team. So hey, I need, who's going to we need to find 4 new resources for entomology, or we got these, hey, I got this brand new entomology book and I need chapters 2, 3, 4 summarized, right? What kids are going to do that? What's the quality of the work they're giving you? Again, I think the challenge there is it's going to capture your hard workers, which, don't get me wrong, I think that's kind of how I made it through school, right? I tend to grind a lot. I'm not necessarily the most intuitive learner, intuitive student. My oldest son drives me nuts because he's the opposite. That kid almost does next to nothing, and yet he's doing excellent, and gets fantastic grades, did exceptionally well on his ACT, drives me nuts because he's just got the skill. The other challenge I think with team challenges is it can make making your team seem transactional, right? And again, that's not necessarily something we want. And just a real quick aside on that, if you want to hear great transactional stories, there's a book about college admissions called The Price of Admissions that came out probably about 10 years ago, that talks about, long before any of the USC and the Hollywood kind of admission scandal stuff, but talks a lot about that and how you can get transactional admissions and that kind of thing. My favorite thing, and Laura, I think this one is sort of a big one, is I'm a huge believer in a 3-2-1 list. And what I do for a 3-2-1 list is you ask the kids for 3 events that they really, really want to have. You ask the kids for 2 events that if they ended up in them, they'd be okay with. And you ask them for the 1 event that they really want to avoid, right? That they just really, if all things are possible, they do not want to do that event. And then you kind of look to mix and match and try and make sure that, again, like to your point, you got kids, a whole bunch of kids that want to do this one, a couple of particular events. That's great, but maybe you can get them so that, all right, not everybody got their top choice, but everybody got their 3s, right? Or one of their 3s. If that makes sense. I think that's another approach. I also think you can do like captain or team choice, right? I mean, the kids know who works well together. The kids know the kids, I mean, the kids know the kind of who's putting the effort in and who doesn't necessarily do that kind of stuff. Now, I will say that the times that I've seen this done, it sometimes can lead to favoritism. So I don't think you can make it um, entirely the kid's choice, right? I've watched it and it says the only it's akin to the popular, you mean quote unquote popular kids ended up, although that's the 15-person roster, because they were all friends. And you, that's not necessarily the right way and it doesn't lead to it. So I think there's got to be some adult element to it. There's got to be some adult sign off before things are finalized or announced. But it doesn't hurt to let the kids kind of express what they think and what they know. I think it's okay to mix and match strategies. So there is no one universal answer. I would encourage you to try a bunch of different stuff out. The only thing is, whatever you decide, I think you got to be transparent about it, right? And I think you got to stick to it. Okay, and that's the important thing. So Barbara just threw a question up here. What about build events? It's harder to test for that without wasting materials. Any challenges you recommend? So many kids want to do air trajectory and scrambler at my school. All right. Yes, here's a couple of things I would throw out there for build events. One, this goes back to the idea of prototypes, right? Don't necessarily use the actual materials, right? So if you're building towers, build straw towers, right? And you can still, you can check designs or, build spaghetti towers, right? Use cheap materials. And yes, you're going to burn through some materials, but it can be cheap and quick stuff. For air trajectory and scrambler, I think one of the things to do is break it into component pieces. So again, back to the NASA and kind of the phase-in analogy, right? Like have them draw out what they think an air trajectory should look like. Have them walk you through it. Look for areas that can create challenges, right? So we all know air trajectory, a lot depends upon the air bladder and making sure there's seals with the device. How is the weight going to fall cleanly, right? Because you don't want to lose energy because there's friction in the drop or it's not going to drop evenly or reliably. That kind of thing. Think about what kind of air chamber they bring you. Because I've seen some of the more competitive and the more interesting ones I saw last year weren't the traditional kind of stomp rocket design. They were the kind of an air piston design. So again, do the kids show you something? Do they offer you a creative design or creative idea? That's also where I think something like Onshape can help because again, you can do some of that designing in the outside world, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be all physical. At Scrambler, it's component pieces, right? So, hey, show me. How about show me you can build a car that breaks, or breaks. I mean, meaning stop, not falls apart, right? Because if you can't build me a little model car, out of egg cartons or a piece of wood and some CDs, that can come to a stop, that you know how to make it stop, right? That's kind of a big sticking point, right? Start there, start with the kind of the key pieces and kind of build back. Okay. So then, Chital, and I'm hoping I got that right. Given that the study event content varies each year, apart from invitational, how do we ensure the right references from the test kit practices available for purchase on the SO website? Okay. Couple of things. One of the, I'll be honest, the easiest way to look at it is if you're really looking for tests from the Science Olympiad store, the best resource to buy for any given year is the starter packs, right? Because a starter pack comes with notes as well as 6 exams. So you'll get, and usually they're almost always national exams or They're sort of released exams from some of the best invitationals that would share that we could find and would be willing to share. The other thing you can do, we do sell test packets, which are bundles of tests from previous national tournaments. I do not have the 2024 yet in the store. We're waiting on a couple of pieces of information to be able to get those released. But if you're doing and looking for stuff for events where the content doesn't change, so disease detectives, what else? I'm trying to think of another good one. Chem lab changes, crime busters, forensics, those kind of events, you're gonna be good. You can use test packets from the store, right? Events where the content changes every year, anatomy and physiology, dynamic planet, meteorology, like any of the what else? Chem lab, right? Are some examples where the content changes, right? So they may not be the greatest ones to use a test packet for. Then the other challenge, you just got to look to make sure the event was run. Things like, remote sensing, geologic mapping, wind power, optics, those tests, again, the content's pretty decent, but the thing is, they're only in for 2-year periods. So you really got to pay attention to the whatchamacallit, the table of contents for the test packet to make sure you're getting an event you're looking for. Last but not least, I will throw out, and if you haven't, go to the event pages for Codebusters, whether it's Division B or Division C at soinc.org, right? John Tobe is our Codebusters National Supervisor. His website, and the links are there, has a ton of resources up on Codebusters and how to create exams and do that kind of stuff. All right. So hopefully that gives you some help and some guidance. All right. All right. So Katie throws this question up about how long is a session and how long is your season and how often do you meet and for how long? So Katie, for the coaching program, we did a 26-week season from start to final tournament. It's set up to do a invitational at 18 weeks. Obviously, then you can modify. And the thought was that the kids met twice a week for 90 minutes. So, and I think that's a reasonable amount of time. Now, clearly you can do it with less, right? I think you just need to be more focused on what you're doing in those meetings. The other thing that I know teams have done is, and you could easily do with this approach of tackling it by event type, right, is break it up. So if you as the teacher can be there 3 days a week, I want my build kids on Tuesdays, I want my core knowledge kids on Wednesdays, and I want my lab kids on Thursdays. And then you can focus in specifically on those types of events. And if you're a hybrid, you're coming 2 days a week. Might be one option. But there's a bunch of stuff. But if you're really looking for a lot of details on that, I'd encourage you to think about it. It's pricey, but it is well worth it, the coaching program. All right. Make sure kids are completing notes and studying. All right, Adam. Wow, thank you so much for that one. So Adam just threw a question out there about how do I make sure the kids are completing notes and studying without discouraging them from doing the club? I fear if we make the club too strict, many kids will leave. Absolutely. If it's not fun, you definitely get a chance of losing your kids. And I appreciate you asking that because I want to talk about keeping students motivated. So again, much like I asked Laura, if I'm going to move into that, if I don't quite get it here, please let me know and fire another question back. I'm more than happy to try and answer it. So when we talk about student motivation, a couple of things to think about, right? Students are all different. There isn't going to be one size that fits everybody, right? And even if you do find something, it may not work every single time, right? Or it may not work in every single setting. So what you really need to do is understand the kids. And my big thing is thinking about, and I encourage you to think about this, hanging out, messing around, geeking out, triad. And it's sort of this research on why kids do stuff, right? The vast majority of kids, and kind of Adam, I think, talked about it, right? They're willing, they're interested, they're okay, they're willing to hang out with their friends, and they enjoy hanging out, they being around stuff. But if it gets too serious, too real, too demanding, and I'm out, right? Then the next level up from that is the messing around kids. And these kids are a little more committed, but they are not all in. They are not your most fervent, true believers. Then you get the kids that are in the geeking out level where this is it. So one of the things I think you think about is, okay, you kind of get to understand the kids and what they're looking for, and you set your expectations accordingly, right? Again, talk about my two boys. My youngest boy is an absolute 100% basketball junkie. This kid, he was talking about they have tryouts for his high school basketball team are coming up here in early November. He's like, they're 5 weeks away. He goes, I can't wait. He's thinking about basketball tryouts and basketball every single day. His older brother also plays basketball. Doesn't think about it that much, right? He'll go to some workouts, he'll try, he enjoys it, right? He likes playing, but he is not all in. He is not going to go to extra workouts. He is not getting up early every day, like his younger brother. Who, if I could build a gym in the back of the house, I don't think I'd ever see him touch a video game. Is how much this kid loves basketball. So again, I point that out to show you things to look for and kind of things your kids are going to show you about where they fall on the hanging out, messing around, geeking out triad. The other thing is they got to match your team. Whatever you're doing needs to match kind of your expectations. And we talked about earlier, if you're just starting out, right, and this is about fun, I don't think you can be super demanding and be a super hard individual over a lot of things, right? You need to give the kids some grace. You need to give the kids some understanding because and give yourself some flexibility. Now, if you're the team that 35 of the last 35 years you've gone to the national tournament from your state and you already have a block of hotel rooms booked and you're looking at airfare or figuring out whether you're going to, do coach buses to Lincoln and you've already started mapping out restaurants, national tournament weekend, then maybe you can step it off, right? And you can be more demanding. You can have better expectations because the kids know there's a different level of kind of payoff and a different level of engagement here at the end. All right, so some of the tools. Schedules and deadlines, I think you need to be reasonable about them, be transparent. Like, why do we have them? Why do they need to be these specific days? And you got to stick to them. And this is back to Laura's point. Well, how do I deal with kids that are missing, like really want to be on events? So you've tried to do your best, get them assigned to an event. If there are a bunch of kids working on the event and you got one of them that, yeah, I really love anatomy and physiology. I really want to do anatomy and physiology, but they were assigned, hey, I need 3 new pages of notes. I need 2 new references. I need something like this. And they never can hit a deadline. There's your rationale for explaining to them why they're not going to be part of anatomy and physiology. A lot of teams that do rankings and depth charts. That's great. That works, right? But you need to collect data often. And you need to make sure that things change. Because nothing's worse than, we're going to, your performance in practice and the work you do between now and the tournament's going to determine whether or not, where you fall for an event, right? But then if you never change anything and you never highlight the fact that things change, that's no longer a motivating tool. You can do rewards and incentives. You just got to identify what you want to incent. right? So is it attendance at practice? Is it hitting deadlines? Is it finding new resources? Is it being creative? Hey, is it bringing new people to the team? All those things can be possible things to it, right? And the whatever you do has to match the level of the task, right? So if it's not really important or it's not really that big of a deal, right? It can't be, the $100 check every single time, with a full-size candy bar. And I will share with you what my first teacher observation told me. Stop making your class SeaWorld. I rewarded everything, right? And she meant, so I basically turned my classroom into like, barking seals, right? Hey, great, congratulations, you showed up today. Great, you raised your hand this time. Hey, here's a piece of, not everything needs to be rewarded. So make sure you kind of match and you're targeting things that matter to you and are important to the team. Last but not least, apologies, just wanted to check out. Oh, okay. I'll get to those questions in the chat real quick. And I will send you guys a link. And actually, before I go, I will throw the link to it in the chat. But I also make sure you get it afterwards. Is the interaction log. And this is a tool for progress monitoring. And it's something that I've taken from when I was doing work as a collaborative coach. The idea is it's just a written record that you put together through conversation. And it would be with you as the coach and the kids working on a particular event. And you're really settling 5 questions. You ask the kids what's going well, right? And they document kind of what's going well, right? What needs to be improved, right? And this is both from their perspective and from your perspective, right? Then spell out the actions the kids will take. And this can be things that they're going to commit to. This can be things you as the coach need them to commit to. Then you also put down like, okay, what's your skin in the game, right? What actions are you going to take? So again, hey, kids are struggling with finding information about fossils from a particular geologic period. Okay, so one of the things that you as a coach is you're going to try and find them a resource around those fossils, right? And then what you do is you set your next interaction date. So when's your next check-in? Right? How long do we have for them to do their stuff, you to do your stuff, and kind of get things moving, right? So, and I think the really cool thing about it is the students drive a lot of the conversation, and the students have to commit to specific things, which back to Adam, your point about how do you get the kids motivated to hit the deadlines and make sure they're doing stuff? Well, you're reminding them the things they committed to, right? So it isn't as much a task you put on them, but a task that they themselves said they were interested in doing, they wanted to do. So I think that's can be a huge help in kind of making that process. All right. Cool. Real quick, I had talked about the webinars. Right? Apologies, I screwed up looks like I forgot to flip the colors. If you go to soinc.org/join/workshops, you can find signups for all of these. Next Tuesday, 4 Ways Onshape can help you to design your devices. So this is largely for build events and testing, but I also think it can help with some of the things that we talked about here in terms of tryout activities and testing out ideas and kind of simplifying stuff. Then Wednesday, November 6th, I'll be doing another one. It seems like I was stuck on the number 4 when I was coming up with the names of these. I'm gonna give you 4 fundraising strategies to help your Science Olympiad team on November 6th. On Thursday, November 14th, I have a fantastic speaker, Dr. Tina Chopra from Wayne State University School of Medicine, right? And she is an actual disease detective and is going to talk about how to run outbreak investigations and answer questions about the content for disease detectives. On Thursday, November 19th, Unshape is coming back to talk about one of our trial events that we're super excited about and is going to be part of the competition here soon. And that's engineering CAD. So for those of you not into the building space, CAD's computer aided design. It is a massive tool that engineers use in their everyday work practices. And I think this is a really kind of cool event for the kids. And Onshape's going to talk about what the kids need to do to prepare for the event and what adults need to do to be able to run the event as a trial event at tournaments. And then another really great one on Wednesday, November 20th is What is Engineering? And I have Dr. Jeffrey Beavers from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln College of Engineering. He is their admissions person, and he's going to talk about engineering careers, engineering schools, and just kind of like what does it mean and what does it look like if you decide, hey, I want to go on and be an engineer. What does your kind of future look like? So we got all that coming up. I would encourage you again, the links there. Also, if you haven't, follow us on Instagram, Science Olympiad Official. We'll also have information about all this stuff coming up. Michelle puts out about Sciali.org is a great place to take a look at for past year's topics. Sciali is a great idea. I do think my only caution with Sciali is it is student run. And the last couple of years, there's been some kind of, I don't want to say management issues, but the site's been down a bit. So just understand, definitely try it out and definitely support them, but also realize if stuff's up, you may need to check back a little bit. Adora asked a question about the Codebusters National Director. His gentleman's name is John Tobes, and that's Toebes, or Tobes, I should say. And if you go to soinc.org and you look under events, and it doesn't matter whether it's Division B or Division C, you're going to find links to all the great stuff he has out there for Codebusters. All right. So talked about that. I got that up there for any last questions. If you don't mind, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to see if I can get here. Okay. Apologies while I talk myself through this. All right. In the chat, I just threw up a link. If you want to see an actual interaction log that you can download and fill out and use with your kids, there it is. I'll also make sure it is in the follow-up email when you get the link for this. We'll also make sure the slides are out. Those of you that stuck around, thank you so much. Sorry I went over 18 minutes. I hope it was worthwhile. And like I said, definitely, if you like this, you like any other content, please keep checking our workshops page, because I'm trying to build and add more of these webinars out there. Now that we're in season, I'm going to try and get a lot more of them content and student focused as well, particularly the ones on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if there are no other questions, I just want to thank you guys again for hanging out and spending some time with me. Again, hopefully it was useful, but we got one last one. Oh, so thank you very much, James. I appreciate the positive feedback. But I wish you guys a wonderful evening. Good luck on your seasons. And as always, if please, I hope to see you at an event.